Hi everyone and welcome to week 6. As you know, we're going through and looking at this 4-stage training model, and in our case HRD model. So we're looking at identifying needs that we did last week, needs of the organisation, the individual, the group, and then looking this week at designing the requirements and delivering the actual activities, i.e. the doing part of it. So we're looking to appreciate the range of factors that influence decisions about training and learning, strategies and methods, and most importantly, HRD is not a recipe. So your creativity, your knowledge, your experience all plays into how you actually deliver HRD. What you think will work, what you can measure, the whole design. So it's a fairly complicated activity that needs to occur. We're also going to look at transfer, because transfer out of a training situation is critical. If you obviously can't apply what you've learned back at work, then it's not really worth doing. So it's really looking at how you might transfer. So obviously some things like personal development perhaps may not directly transfer back, but that you need to be very aware of that in your design and what you're aiming for. And also talking about other relevant issues here, including costs, which is obviously big in this area. So with design considerations, there's just a whole range of things that feed into that. The actual media that you've got, even there on the right, so what are your resources? Andragogy, we've talked about adult learning. How do we bring those factors to play? What environment have we got to train in? As a trainer, what are our experiences? What do we need to learn? Costs, obviously, we're going to talk about, but length is a really important factor which relates to cost. But how long is it going to take to run this session? Or to, should it be, 1 hour a week over 10 weeks, or some sort of relation-based arrangement, mentor-mentee, that sort of thing. RPL there refers to recognition of prior learning, which you would have heard of. And so that's about getting the pitching correctly, so that you're not expecting people to learn more or less than is relevant to their particular developmental profile. So the scope of HRD, as I've mentioned earlier, is it encompasses so much. It encompasses organisation-wide approaches. So what can we do as a whole organisation, looking at the strategies? Are there aspects that all employees and individuals need to be aware of? For example, there might be new legislation that applies to the whole organisation, or a culture change that's necessary across a whole organisation, as well as much more specific perspectives. So a particular person might need help to get promotion to the next level, and that might be a leadership training course, or it might be learning a particular program, or that sort of thing. So it's important to be aware of that the specifics of that are available. So in order to do this, have a look at the case study, Harvey Nichols, on page 155 of the text. You can see there that the case outlines organisational-wide values. So what have they identified? A feel-good experience, exclusive but accessible, fashion leadership. So that's just in their particular case, but they've looked at those values. And then the case goes on to mention specific HRD interventions, such as role plays and discussions. So that's the doing part of it. What are they actually going to do? And within that case, you can see some of the principles of design and delivery that we'll be talking about. So some of the things they mention are responsiveness by managers to training needs. So this idea that yes, training and development is planned, but it shouldn't be just set in concrete. It needs to have this real responsiveness to what people want and what's going to help them in their job. They really highlight in this case work-based training. So a lot of the training occurs on the job. Again, this helps with transfer that we're going to talk about later. They draw on real-life context, so role-play methods. This is perfect, isn't it, for customer service, working with customers, working with other people on a team. So we have someone play out maybe a difficult customer or a complicated customer, and then as a service person, how do you actually manage that? What is the sorts of things you should say, and what non-verbal should you use? And you can learn that through a role-play method. The case brings in the relevance and transfer of skills and the importance of feedback and support. Feedback, in order for us to learn, we do need feedback. So you've noticed that obviously in your life, in your work and in your assignments, where you look forward to seeing, well, okay, what were the parts of my assignment that worked really well in the Marcus assessment, and what are the things that I need to work on. We all have those needs. And also support. As learners, sometimes we feel a bit vulnerable, and so just some general level of emotional support from others around us is useful, as well as maybe it's practical support, some sort of help with attending classes or something like that. So it can be practical support, informational support. You might just need some help with a particular thing, and social support is a general sort of just sense of belonging that needs to be created. So when you're designing training, this particular figure here, 7.1 from the text, number one, nature of learning needs, refers to the skills and knowledge and attitudes that you hope to help your participants develop. You need to know your own purpose and objectives of the training. The human factors, so what individual differences do you expect to come across? What group do they actually work in? Who can help them to develop skills? The costs, as I mentioned, and the resources, what sorts of training venues are available, and the overall organisation context and culture. So each HRD activity is within a particular context. So that's why we focus so heavily in this course on cases, to give you that idea. Number 3, which is a little bit out of order there, learning principles and learning transfer. So we've already discussed learning principles. What are we thinking about there? Say adult learning. Some of the theories that we've already discussed. How do we reinforce appropriate skill development? And then transfer of learning, which I'm going to go on to talk about. So all of those things feed into the choice of your training strategy and the design of a training event, or HRD strategy or activity. So the design principles relate down the left-hand side of this slide to needs, the objectives that we set up, the theories that we bring into play, and that we rely on to help guide us in our choice of what we do, how we choose those methods, how it all flows and integrates, and that's the value of the session plan. You can see there the timing, you can see the resources, you can see the variety, you can see how it's going to be introduced and concluded, and the sorts of activities. So it is important to flow and to integrate and to also be linked together and show some variety so that people really can engage. There's principles around transfer, As I mentioned, every training situation needs to be assessed for transferability, and then your evaluation, so that can be done in a whole range of ways, which we'll consider more next week. Just in terms of the needs, we need to know, of course, what knowledge, skills and attitudes we're trying to impart, and then translating those needs into objectives. So you've probably heard of the SMART objectives. They are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and there is a time frame. So that that helps you in your own thinking. How can I impart something really clear about this this training session or this overall HRD program? And some of the principles are, learners receive relevant feedback, are more responsive, and the learning experience will be much better. Learners need to be actively involved, and there are logical interrelated segments. That's what I'm saying with flow. So in Chapter 7 on page 158 to 159, you'll see some learning principles in overview, and these are the kinds of principles that you're thinking about throughout this unit. So in this case, this comes through in your assessments. So transfer. In teaching, there's quite an old saying about teachers aren't just there to fill up the jug with water or to fill up anything. So it's really about transfer and acknowledging that it's complex. Telling someone isn't going to help them develop a new skill usually. So they need to do it, they need to work with the ideas, they need to have the opportunity to practice, etc. So transfer really is a complex situation, and it requires consideration in all of the training and development processes. It can be done in a great variety of ways. So in that case we're talking about just a little bit earlier, the transfer was more likely to happen because that training was really on the job. They didn't go off somewhere and learn a whole lot of theory. It was happening in situ. So a model of the transfer process is thinking about these particular aspects. So you can see on the far right hand side of this slide generalisation and maintenance. So that's about the idea that the learning is generalised from the learning situation. So it can be applied. So good customer service skills could take place in a number of different organisations if the person, say, moved jobs, and can be maintained. So there might need to be recaps on learning. You know that we forget a lot, and as HRD people we need to be really aware of that, the need for reinforcement, perhaps having ongoing follow-ups in the training and development. So on the left hand side we need to think about trainee characteristics. So the programs that we run have to fit with the person's needs, their motivation and their ability. So if a person feels like they need the training, they're going to benefit from it, they will be more motivated. And if you as a teacher can make it more interesting and relevant, that will also improve motivation. Making it flow, having good principles of design, these are all things that are helpful. So creating a good learning environment, a positive learning environment, a supportive learning environment, and then making sure that you help people to apply transfer. So this idea of a self-management strategy can be a good one. So at the end of a training, say, session, after a few hours, maybe doing practical things and talking about how to become a better leader, for example. You might have, just as an example, at the end of that, some notes, your own personal plan, you might call it personal leadership plan about the sorts of things that you could do to use this back in the workplace. So you could say offer to mentor somebody else, or you could offer to chair a meeting, or you could just use the communication skills that you've learned. So, but if you take the time to write those down at the end of the session, think about them, then that would be a self-management strategy that could help you then back at the workplace. And the environment itself is important. So if you've got a very supportive environment where you work, and your managers are supportive and your peers are supportive, well, then you can, you're more likely to be able to transfer your learning back to work. So people perhaps show an interest, give you opportunities to use leadership skills. Just thinking about that last example, the opportunity to perform, and also the technological support. So obviously, you know, learning a computer program isn't going to be much good unless you get the opportunity to learn it. But it's the same with the other skills as well. Okay, so every HRD program training session needs a plan. It's important to record those stages. So even though it's not going to become a recipe, it's a creative activity, you can still build up a whole set of experiences. So you might have a whole lot of individual session plans, and you can use those to inform you next time, especially if you make some notes about what worked, didn't work, what you could have done differently. So you can see an example of a session plan under Resources for Assessment Item 2. And really it's just like a run sheet, but it's really important to keep you on track. It must include the actual name of the session, perhaps where it fits in. Is it an individual session in a wider set of plans? How are you going to introduce it? What warm-up are you going to use? Because people really respond to that, to maybe some questions on the topic. What do you know about already? Introducing yourself to others. And there's lots of examples of warm-ups that you can look on that Business Balls website. Some of the other examples I've given in the activities on this week's unit content. So what's the activity you've got to be? Now, it could be obviously anything, but you do need to be aware of people's sensibilities. Some of those warm-ups on the website that I put up are pretty physical. Some people could be uncomfortable with that. They mightn't feel like they want to have that much personal contact. Obviously younger people might be more interested in that, whereas older people, it might just make them turn them off, you know. So you've got to really think about, okay, the activities, and then what are you actually going to do? What substantial content are you going to have? A warm-up's just to get people involved, really. Now, I've talked already about the cold cycle, so do make sure that once you've had an activity, you might have a case study discussion, for example, or some set of role plays. You do have to take the time to reflect on that, to process the learning and the activity. Think about that theoretically, what does this mean in your situation, and how am I going to apply it? And that's bringing in that same idea about transfer again, as we talked in the cold cycle. That application is really transfer. How is it going to be assessed? So if it's a role play, are you going to observe? Are you going to have a quiz? How are these things going to be assessed is really important. And later on down the track, 2 weeks' time, how are we going to know if the learning has still been able to continue and be used? And how are you going to conclude it? That's very important, to sum up the key points, bring people back to what the objectives were, and then the evaluation. So you can hand that out, or you can talk to people. And a debrief is really, again, kind of going back over it. What does it mean? making sure people are okay, basically. So, if you just to hone in on goals and objectives for a little while, goals are the really bigger picture. By the end of the program, you can put something broad there like acquired more competent communication skills. But objectives are more specific, and these are what appears on your session plan. So try and make that wording as precise as you can. You want to be able to, your students or your participants, to say, for example, deliver a negative feedback in a supportive manner. So you need to be able to think of ways of assessing that. You might have you might be looking at non-verbal and verbal skills in a role play situation. Another one, make an assertive statement in response to a complex request. So you'd have to teach what an assertive statement is and then see in a role play situation whether a person can actually do that. Or you could get them to write that down. Another objective could be discuss complex communication problems faced by managers. So discuss means that you can articulate the different issues that come up. But the point of this is to say, try and be specific and not be broad, so that you know what you're actually looking for, what people are learning, and what you're going to evaluate. So this is a straightforward example of if you were teaching some really basically a physical activity. So at the end of the session, the learner will be able to ride a bike without falling off 20 metres in a park on the grass. Okay, performance standard conditions. You can probably measure that very easily. And you can see that those objectives, they're SMART. They're specific, measurable, presumably achievable if the person is capable of riding a bike or learning the skill, realistic and time. There's a time frame there. But can we always state objectives? So if you think about management roles, leadership roles, there's lots of complexities and subtleties and in those. So, for example, employees want a participative style. They want to be included. But then they also want someone who's actually quite decisive when it comes to it. So, these are things that need to be thought through. Being situationally appropriate. A manager needs to be able to have a social chat without intimidating people, but then they're the review of a performance, so that's a totally different role. Sometimes they need to give career advice or negative feedback to help a person improve. So how do they show support? How do they respond empathically? How do they delegate? All of these things, they're very complex tasks, and sometimes it seems a bit overwhelming to think about, well, how can I really make a clear objective from that? But it is important so that a person knows if they've achieved these things and it's measurable. So how to show support, if you think about that, the non-verbal components, it could include eye contact, moving forward, going to a quiet, all of these things, a quiet area. So that can all be shown in a role play, or it could be shown through discussion, not so readily, etc. So just thinking about that, what can I actually see and observe, and how can I get that into my objectives? An important factor is costs. HRD has costs, both direct and indirect. The direct is the trainer, the venue hire if you need to, the materials, the printing, those sorts of things, which are fairly easy to add up. The indirect costs are the time off the job. So if you take all your customer service people offline for half a day, that could be disruptive and ultimately really impact badly on your business. So you might employ temporary staff, which is a good idea, but then again, that's a cost. It's important that those issues are thought through. So in other words, as HRD professionals, you do need to think about cost-benefit analysis, and you will need to foreshadow this. Sometimes if you're putting forward to your organisation a training program that you think would be relevant, well then you have to include the costs and the benefits of that program, because an organisation has to see that it's actually worth it, as you know. And evaluation also includes consideration of the costs, which we'll talk about next week. So methods, which is obviously a key component of this week's discussion, are categorised in many different ways. So sometimes you'll see them categorised, individual and group based. So what's appropriate for an individual to learn, but what needs to be group based. What can only really be learnt in the presence of other people. Pedagogical, andragogical. So we've talked about this, children and adult learning, focus on other versus self-management. So with adult learning, we're really going to this whole idea of self-management much more. Now the textbook has a whole lot of methods that it details over a few pages, from page 166 onwards, and as you may have seen in the activities for this week, I've talked about reading those and seeing which ones you've experienced and seeing what you think the advantages and disadvantages are. So the textbook gives quite a lot of details there, but what do you think? Other methods, other times you'll see categories like presentation methods, so that's more from the front, a lecture, hands-on methods, so people doing things, and then more group building methods, which is this important idea of team building and cooperation and decision making in a group, how to get at those things. Presentation is an idea where trainees are passive recipients of information. And that could be important if there's facts to learn, processes, for example, a new legal framework coming in, how to solve problems, health and safety. So, you can obviously see the relevance of presentation methods, lectures, audio-visual techniques, but we really emphasise that hands-on methods need to go with these presentation methods. So you can't just rely on presentation, and there's lots of examples of those. So in the activities, I've given an example of a business game which is Lost at Sea. There's other examples on there, and we're using case studies throughout this behaviour modelling where you're actually showing someone how to do something. Hands-on methods, so that's again working within a work context, and it does depend, though, interestingly, on the skills of the person who's doing the showing. So some people have excellent skills and can pass them on with enthusiasm and correctness, but that is an issue with behaviour modelling. Role plays, I've mentioned, you may find that it's best to give people certain roles to play, or sometimes participants can generate the scripts themselves depending on, so drawing on a real life situation that they've had, a real life problem. Business games, as I mentioned, Lost at Sea is a fairly simple one of those, and there's many that you'll come across, and maybe you've experienced business games where you solve a problem, not exactly to do with your work, but using the skills that you need. And then again, you've got this transferability issue. Okay, what does this have to do? This was fun, it was exciting, it was interesting, but what does it have to do now with some of the real problems you face at work? What can you take away? Again, that whole idea of transfer and application. Simulations, so mirroring what would be in the real world. A well-known one of these, of course, is an airline simulator. No, we don't want our pilots practicing in the plane as it goes. So, you can apply this to management, for example, where managers need to practice perhaps giving negative feedback. It's not a good idea to to sort of do that as a first run through as a very upset employee. Group building methods. I'll put some activities around this on the site. So other methods, coaching and mentoring. Some of these are going to be developed later in the unit. So leadership development, we look more at coaching and development. An important thing to mention is discussion. It's often included in HRD programs, in training programs. It's really important. People can exchange ideas, learn new attitudes, see how other people communicate, etc., etc. Answer questions about a particular problem, but it does require planning. So again, think through what questions you'll ask, anticipate, and think through the issues that could come up and how you're going to manage those. So if you're talking about an ethical issue, it's important to have thought about, what are people likely to say to this? And how will I deal with some of the more controversial issues that come up, because you want to hear those discussions, but then you need to make sure you're protecting the group and helping the group to process some of this information. You need to become a good facilitator, so not saying, oh, that's right, that's wrong, but really, okay, thanks for that, but can we take this off in a different direction, or another way of thinking about that? So being subtle is important, and helping people, encouraging people to participate by being positive. And then you've got to have other ways. So one of the things we've talked about is having a range of ways of learning. So you can hear a voice, but then that'll mean a lot more if it's also on a flip chart, or you can write it up on a whiteboard or something like that, or on the computer. How can you do that? So there's other direct methods. So what you're doing online, of course, someone couldn't have done some years ago. It's difficult with the motivation. Coming to class every week has its own sort of way of motivating you, whereas online, but you're the experts in that area. But you can learn at your own pace and all those sorts of things. So I'm sure you're well aware of that, and that you would have been thinking about this in assessment item 1 as well. Okay, so in overview, we really need to think about the learning outcomes that you want. So that's based on the needs that you ascertain and your own intellectual judgment too. The overall design is important, what methods you're going to use and how you're going to evaluate the program. Need to think about how you're going to make sure that the learning transfers out to another situation, whether it's a personal learning plan or some sort of follow-up activity, all of the above. Evaluating the costs related to the development and use of the method is really important in a cost-benefit analysis sense, and the effectiveness. So, how effective did it seem to you? You may have chosen a role play that fell completely flat. Okay, why did that happen? Was it not well chosen? Was it not work-related? Did you not explain it well enough? Vice versa, you might have had an activity that just went swimmingly, stuck to time, got a lot of people talking, and again, why did that work? So keeping notes on your practice is important, reflecting on your practice is important, and learning over time as you develop experience is important. So some of our assessment items here tap into that idea of reflection and relating it to you and your own learning. So next week, evaluation in more detail, including different levels and types of evaluation, and we'll also be reviewing Module 2 in week 7. Thank you.